Hey, so today we are going to be talking about watercolor. And this is just going to be an introductory video on watercolor, and then the next few videos will actually be doing it. So I want to start off with what equipment you'll need to be getting for next time. Paper towels to dry your paintbrush, paper. You can get these watercolor cards at Artist Corner, or you can get them at Hobby Lobby, or you can even get like watercolor sketchbooks, which are really nice if you want to record your journey. You can get those on Amazon. um, any kind of watercolor set would do for these first few classes. This is my little one of my little travel sets, and I like to use that. Have nice colors. This is my favorite paintbrush. This is the one that I travel with. This came in a set of 3. And I like this one the best because it just is more versatile. It's the biggest, and I'm going to show you what it does. I'm going to get it wet. And then you notice when I push hard, it broadens those bristles and makes a nice wide path. Or I can just round up the tip, and then I've got a nice little sharp tip to do detail with, and then everything in between. So this is size 12 round brush. So if you just want to buy one, that would be the one to buy. And then this little water cup, it collapses so I can pack it, but that's what I put my water in. So those are the supplies you'll need for the next 2 classes. And now we're going to dive into the idea of watercolor. I'm going to introduce, let's do the slideshow. So this is October Clouds by Matthew White, and he is one of my favorite watercolor artists. He just has a way of rendering things in just a simple and yet powerful way. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is because it's an example of 2 techniques that are foundational for watercolor. Before we go into that example, I want to explain a little bit about watercolor. Watercolor is a medium that is kind of translucent. The pigment and the water soak into the paper. Whereas with oils and acrylics, they're on the surface of the paper or the canvas that is being painted on. Watercolor soaks in, so it creates more of a kind of a dreamy effect. It creates more of a kind of like a memory versus actually being there at the place. And so those are some of the reasons why people really enjoy watercolor. It also kind of has a spontaneous nature to it, which when you master the skills of it, allows you to do some really cool things. So with that introduction, we're now going to go back to Matthew White and his painting of October Clouds. The sky that you see was done with a technique called wet on wet. Wet on wet is when you get the paper wet before you even put any pigment on. Pigment is watercolor, the paint. And then once that surface is wet, you drop colors into it or you paint strokes in it and let it just kind of fuzz out. Because you notice that the sky has a lot more soft edges, blended edges. There are some sharper edges, but for the most part, they're very blendy. Also, another note on watercolor, the white that you see in watercolor is the paper. It's an absence of the watercolor paint. And watercolorists work from light to dark because that white, the existing white of the paper, is critical to a lot of what they want to render. So you have this very blended sky with only some sharp lines. And then you have, in contrast, the bottom part, which is very well defined, and the edges are very clear. That particular technique on the bottom part is called wet on dry. So the sky was done first, the paper was completely dried, and then the bottom part was added. So you get those nice crisp edges and lines that help really define objects and pop them out. The next one we're going to do is by Elmer Yazzie. He is a Native American watercolorist and quite well known. And same thing, you see the sky, wet on wet. Wet surface with paint dropped in it to make it fuzz out like that. And then that lake area, again, wet on wet. But then the landforms and the hills and the little trees in the distance, those were all done with wet paint on a dry surface. So that's kind of our introduction to watercolor. Get your supplies and get ready for next week because we'll be diving into the middle of the pool, not the deep end, but we're not going to tiptoe in the front part. We're going to make a really cool little picture with one color. So we'll see you next week.